holy is of the Lord. For the Lord is our righteousness. It is important for us when we no need to boast about it, but to believe that we are holy people. The devil seeks to convince us that we can never be holy, so that we can never truly be holy. He knows that should we believe that God can make us holy, we will definitely be holy. And he knows that God can make us holy. But if in the God who can make you holy, then he can have you unholy. But verse 4, it is this that we cannot do in a Christian journey, in a Christian life, without standing up for these truths. For we know by grace alone, through faith. And we need to contend for the grace of God. Without the grace of God, then our salvation is as nothingness. It is the plan of the devil that the grace of God may not be thoroughly understood, perceived, and appreciated by young people and old people in the church today, so that we can never fully attain to what the grace is to offer us. Another thing that we need to contend for, that we find in the book of Jude, is in verse 7, mentions from verse 7. He singles out that men are wicked. Satan. You know, these days nothing is attributed to Satan. All things are attributed to God. All wickedness, all evil, it is the will of God. People believe that all the harm that is in the world is inflicted upon us by God. We have an education system that does not teach us to understand or to appreciate that we have a power against which we contend. It is the power of the enemy, Hashatan, our enemy. And it is he who inflicts all the evils on men. If we could understand the concept of Hashatan, the enemy of man, and understand his enmity towards us, we would appreciate the power that is capable of saving us from him. But the devil plans that we should never agree that he exists. Jude singles it out to those who are called, those who are sanctified, and those who are preserved in Jesus Christ. He also singles out in verses 6, 7, and in verse 13, that there is the judgment, and there is hell and destruction. He makes an example of those who were delivered by God from Egypt and destroyed by him in the wilderness. He makes an example of Sodom and Gomorrah, to which Lot ministered, but was destroyed by God through fire and brimstone. He makes an example of a world before the flood that was created by God and made by him, but that was also destroyed by him at the flood. He says he is a just God, he is a good God, he's a great God, he's a loving God, but you should be mindful, he is also a God who brings judgment. He's a God who has called us. He's a God who has given us the privilege of worship. He's a God who has given us the privilege of being in his house. But he's a God who will destroy us in hell if we do not abide in him. Sometimes we find it interesting to understand God as good and loving, and a God who has total tolerance of our sinfulness and of our depravity. This God is also a God who will destroy us with Satan if we do not believe in him and if we do not surrender in him. He also makes reference to justification by faith in verse 11. He says, these are they. He says, woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain. Do we know the way of Cain? Justification by works. This is the way of Cain. A man who justifies himself through his produce, through his power, through his capabilities, through his inheritance, through his possessions. A man who thinks they can be counted for something because of what they have. He says, woe unto this man. The principle of justification by faith. Faith alone without works. Not that works are not important. Not that we should go on in sin because now we are saved by faith. God forbid. But man is justified by faith in God alone. And Jude says, this is the faith for which you need to contend. How are we to contend for this faith? We are to contend for this faith in three ways. By living it. Living. We need to live the faith to stand up for it. This is one blessed way through which we can stand for our faith if we outlive its principles. The faith that is only professed and not outlived cannot change the world. Our world, Sunnyside, needs people who can outlive the principles of their faith. This is how we may show that we stand for the faith. We stand for the truth when we live according to it. There is no greater defense of the faith and proof of its power than a Christ-like life. Somebody must see Christ in us. Though we must speak the truth and stand up for the truth, we must do it and do it in love. Let us beware of becoming hard, critical, and uncharitable and unchristlike while we outlive the truth. For the God whom we resemble is the God who is love, who is charitable, who is kind, who is loving. And while we show forth his message and his truth to others, we must resemble these characteristics. The greatest enemy, the greatest injury to the cause of truth has been those professed Christians who have failed to outlive the principles of the truth. The greatest injury to the cause of truth are found in the church of God today. Because someone has not been called to it. Someone has not been inspired or attracted to it. By our cause, we have marred and have injured the cause of truth. Live out the truth and thus defend the truth. Secondly, by proclaiming it. We can defend the truth by proclaiming the truth. We can stand up for the truth by preaching the gospel truth. The positive certainties of the faith. These are going to kill the error that is in the world in the quickest possible way. Preaching the truth and exposing error. Focusing on the elements of truth and proclaiming them in their simplicity, in their plainness, and yet with power, with a power of a holy life. These will mar the cause of error and will expose the errors of sin. And lastly, we can defend the truth by suffering for it. It is your privilege to suffer for the truth. There are men who have lived before us who have suffered for this truth. There are men and women who have lost that he might be one of us to save us. Do you think that you can ever be proud, that you can ever be happy, that you can ever be love and admiration of the truth